Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is the graphically revolutionary Super Nintendo game that began the meteoric rise of the studio that was once one of Nintendo's greatest second-party developers, 1994's Donkey Kong Country.
Following that is the adventure of bringing a hero back to life, assembling a new team, and gaining their loyalty to take down the biggest alien threat known to humanity, 2010's Mass Effect 2. What could possibly be a theme between Donkey Kong Country and Mass Effect 2? I'll tell you, and it's not one you'd expect. So, both games have these insect-like enemies with stingers. And you're like, what? That's it? Yeah, Donkey Kong Country has the zinger enemy. So it's a little bee. And Mass Effect 2 has the Seeker Swarm that the collector uses to sting and freeze humanity for taking them away. That's about it, I think.
Has it ever been more apparent that we only come up with these themes literally right before recording?
We're reaching. It's tough, but
sometimes we pick games based on what will theme well with the other game, but most of the time it's just, I want to talk about this game today.
Yep. And that will be this case. No composer follow-up headlines this time around. Joe, as of release, you are back from PAX East, but you have not left for PAX East as of the time of this recording, so we can't look into the future. But I'm assuming you had a great time. We'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, I'll definitely had a good time looking into the future. Yeah, next week I'll come in with like my PAX stories, hopefully about the Supergiant concert and all that. But like you said, at time of release, I got back from PAX yesterday.
Woo!
So there's that. So obviously, because this is being recorded so far in advance, no composer news, meaning we can jump directly into the first game, being Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong Country was originally released in November of 1994 in all 3 major regions. November 21st in North America, 24th in Europe, and 26th in Japan, which is very unusual for games of this era that they were all released the same year that close together. Like, usually there's months between releases. So it's bizarre. Like, remember, it was like a year and a half between America getting Castlevania and Japan getting Castlevania a couple weeks ago. Odd. I found that interesting. It was developed by Rare and published by Nintendo, and I've already given you the whole rundown on why Rare was at one point the top dog when it came to churning out quality game after quality game on Nintendo platforms. They were the biggest second-party developer that Nintendo had for years. You can actually find that information back on episode 15 when I talked about Donkey Kong 64. I went into Rare's history and prominence in that, and their downfall as well in that episode. So I don't want to waste too much time going into that a second time. Suffice it to say, though, this is the game that started that whole meteoric rise. This is the one that truly brought Rare into the spotlight, and is also the game that defined the character of Donkey Kong into the character that we know today. Before this, he was merely the villain of the arcade game, the big pixelated gorilla. In fact, he didn't even have his red tie until the Game Boy release of that exact arcade game. So that was even a fairly new concept at the time. And this game gave him a new home with new lore and new characters and a new setting, and it just let him be the hero, and it basically spawned him into his own franchise outside of Mario, who he had been introduced alongside. So, Donkey Kong Country, for anybody that does not know, is a 2D platformer that stars both the titular Donkey Kong as well as his friend Diddy Kong, who was a new character created just for this game. It's generally your usual 2D platformer. You have the ability to jump, you can do a roll attack, but the big difference is during the game you will always have either one of those Kongs, Diddy or Donkey, or the other. And sometimes you'll have both. And basically, if you have both, one is the one that you are controlling, and the other is in the back, like standing behind you in an invincible state, and just sort of following you around, basically. And if you get hit, then the active character runs away, and the character in the back moves to the front, and they are now the character you are controlling. And the only way to get that other character back is to break a DK barrel, which are found throughout the level. And both characters have pros and cons to them. Diddy is a lot more agile. He can jump higher, he can roll faster, he can run faster, etc., etc. And he also just has a smaller hitbox. But there are certain enemies that Diddy cannot kill that DK can. So there's weighing pros and cons when it comes to which character you want to play as. Personally, I prefer playing as Diddy whenever humanly possible. So, the story of Donkey Kong Country is a very simple one. DK and the rest of the Kong family live peacefully on DK Island. But one day, this peace is threatened by the evil Kremlings and their notorious leader, King K. Rool, who is also a new character that was introduced in this game. They steal DK's banana horde and try to take over the island. Alongside Diddy Kong, and with the help of characters like Cranky Kong, Funky Kong, and Candy Kong, DK must defeat the Kremlings and retrieve his bananas no matter the cost. And that's basically that's the whole story. So in gameplay, like, Cranky gives hints and is also supposed to be the original Donkey Kong, while Donkey Kong is supposed to be a grown-up version of Donkey Kong Jr. I don't know if that was established in this game, or if it was something that they confirmed later. But like, Cranky has this whole thing where he's an old dude, and he thinks games were so much better back in the day. And that starts to make way more sense when you realize that he was the character back in the day.
Well, it's also implied at the beginning when, like, the old da-da-da,
that is true.
The Donkey Kong theme, and Cranky's sitting there before, there's the new attitude that's coming in as Donkey Kong Country.
You've also got Funky Kong, who handles the sort of quote-unquote fast travel system with his barrel jet that don't use. It sucks. And then there's Candy Kong, who handles save points and makes me viciously uncomfortable, even more so than she does in DK64. To be perfect. Well, no, DK64, she makes me wildly uncomfortable. But in Donkey Kong Country, she comes pretty close as well. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty much it. So this is where I will ask, what are your experiences with Donkey Kong Country?
I probably got halfway through Donkey Kong Country Returns. And then I beat Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze with the help of a friend. But I have never gone back and played the original ones on Super Nintendo. None of the original three.
They are the first games I have any memory of whatsoever. I used to go over to my grandparents' house, and my uncle, who was about, I want to say 5 or 6 years older than me, maybe 7, he had a Super Nintendo, along with all 3 Donkey Kong Country games.
Wow.
And I used to watch him play them. And obviously I didn't really get into gaming myself until I got a Nintendo 64 and Donkey Kong 64 for Christmas. But yeah, So those are the first video games that I have any memory of whatsoever.
And obviously then I'm familiar with, things with the soundtrack and whatnot. A lot of classic melodies that are carried over, but that's really interesting. And that does then, make sense why you'd want, for a Nintendo 64, why you're like, Donkey Kong.
Yeah, it's all about Donkey Kong, baby. I didn't beat any of the three until last year for Smasterpieces. I had never beaten a game in the Country series. They get hard. Donkey Kong Country 2 gets insanely difficult. It's crazy how hard that game gets. Donkey Kong Country 3 is generally less popular, but I still like it a lot. I like them. I've just never sat down and beaten them, except for one for Smasterpieces. So if you want to hear my full thoughts on that game, you should go listen to that episode if you want more in depth than I'm going to give here. But suffice it to say, I really like the Donkey Kong Country series. I don't think that, given today's context, they're all that super special. They don't really do anything outside of their graphical stuff, which is why the games are considered revolutionary, which we'll get into more detail on that in a second. But outside of that, they're just your regular run-of-the-mill platformers. There's really nothing super special about them. I can't say that you are missing something vital by not going back to play them. I think they are worth going back to play, but I'm not going to say like, oh, you're missing out on an incredible experience. They're just platformers. You've played a platformer. You know what they're like.
Yeah, and even then, I would say that most people would generally say, oh, just play 2. Play Donkey Kong Country 2.
2 is generally considered the best one. And 3 is generally considered the worst one, and people hate Kiddy Kong, and I don't know why. I mean, I know why, but I think he gets more of a bad reputation than he deserves. So, the story of Donkey Kong Country's development actually begins a fair bit before the game even entered development. Tim and Chris Stamper, who were the founders of Rare, were investing heavily and experimenting with a Silicon Graphics Challenge workstation that basically allowed them to take 3D models and convert them into 2D sprites that would allow them to put them on a Super Nintendo cartridge. And their initial plan was to make a boxing game using this. I imagine something along the lines of Punch-Out, if I had to guess. But we don't know because this game really didn't make it very far, this concept. But while they were doing that, some senior Nintendo staffers were visiting the studio and were rather impressed by the technology that was on display there. So, the president of Nintendo at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, was advised that, hey, we should really cut a deal with this company. I think they've got some good ideas behind them. I think they could do some good stuff. And from there, Nintendo acquired a 49% share in Rare, making them a second-party developer, and Rare was given permission to make a game using the Donkey Kong license. From there, the game was made in 18 months with a team officially of about, I think, 15 people, 12 to 15 people, but according to certain people, around 20 people had worked on the game when all was said and done. And they made the Donkey Kong Country we know today. Apparently, I found this very interesting. The game was a lot harder when they presented the first playable build to Nintendo, and Nintendo asked them to scale it back a bit because they wanted the game to appeal to a broad audience. And I imagine its success, that might be why Donkey Kong Country 2 is so much harder. Because Nintendo were like, yeah, all right, just do whatever. It's a sequel to a highly successful game. Hit it up if you want.
Yeah.
And boy, did they. Donkey Kong was redesigned from his original appearance, which was the one designed by Shigeru Miyamoto himself, bringing him more in line with an actual gorilla, though not entirely. And they also implemented the iconic red tie. Well, now iconic. It was not iconic at that point. It had only shown up in one game on the Game Boy that, if I had to guess, a lot of people forget that game happened. But this game, I thought the tie was from Donkey Kong Country. That's how little I remember the Game Boy version of Donkey Kong happened. This design became the standard DK design. It's still used to this day. Like, if you think of what Donkey Kong looks like, it's because of this game. Diddy Kong, on the other hand, was originally meant to be an updated version of the character Donkey Kong Jr. However, when Nintendo was shown the design, they felt that it was too much of a departure from the original character and asked Rare to either bring the design closer to Donkey Kong Jr. as he already existed, or just make it a new character altogether. And Rare decided that the better option was to just create a new character in general. And Dinky Kong was born.
What?
And then a legal team told them that they should probably change that name. So Diddy Kong was born. I could not find why a legal team told them they had to change that name.
I mean, probably for the best. I had never heard that story. That's really interesting.
I hadn't either. The source on Wikipedia for a legal team being the reason they changed that name was a physical book. It seemed like it was cited like a physical book. So I don't have access to that information. So I just have to take Wikipedia's word for it. But Dinky Kong, his original name was Dinky Kong. Here's another one of my favorite things that I learned while researching this game. In order to make DK's movements realistic, the original plan of the developers was to spend several hours watching the gorillas at Twycross Zoo. Except, all they learned from doing that is that gorillas don't move very often.
I mean, I could have told you that.
And when they do, that movement is not exactly conducive to a fast-paced 2D platformer. So instead, they decided to base DK and Diddy's movement loosely on the galloping movement of a horse.
Which is actually one of the original animation tests. Honestly, that makes sense.
So I found that super funny because they said they did actually spend several hours watching gorillas at the zoo, and to have all of that equal, hey, gorillas kind of suck. They're not great animals to base this kind of thing on. What if we did horses? Just, that's my favorite story that I discovered researching this, though Dinky Kong is a very close second. Donkey Kong Country is considered one of the first mainstream home video games to use pre-rendered 3D graphics, with Rare's own Killer Instinct and a Finnish Amiga game called Stardust having actually used pre-rendered 3D graphics the year prior in 1993. But this is the first, majorly successful video game to have done it. And therefore that means it's the first, if I've learned anything from all entertainment history. These graphics were considered absolutely revolutionary for the time, and only made possible using the silicon graphics technology that I mentioned earlier. And Rare was taking a huge financial leap of faith on this technology paying big dividends, with the company reportedly purchasing multiple workstations for £80,000 each. Just the act of learning how to use these stations was apparently a huge challenge, and models reportedly took forever to render. There were stories of them setting up images to render when they left the office at 11 p.m., and then it was carefully worded to say maybe they would be done by the time they got back in the morning. That's a lot for an image, and considering this entire game is made up of nothing but those images, whew, boy.
I mean, that sounds really familiar to stories of Toy Story at the time, 1995. But yeah, stories of, one frame being rendered and taking 24 hours. just mind-boggling.
Yeah, like, that's a hell of a time commitment. These machines also apparently required massive air conditioning units all to themselves to keep them from overheating, meaning that all of the air conditioning in Rare's offices was focused on the computers, none of it on the developers.
No.
And it was apparently a very hot summer that year. So, Rare also, for this game specifically, developed a new compression technique that kept more detail in both the animation as well as the graphical fidelity of each of the models. And it was higher quality than any game had previously been able to do so on the SNES. And these graphics paid off because they were a major part of the marketing, with one famous ad featuring a picture of DK's new model reading, quote, "It's taken 22 man years, 32 megs, 32,768 colors, and one supercomputer to make him look this gruesome." Which I don't think is fair to Donkey Kong, because I think he's a very handsome man.
He's svelte. And
I don't appreciate them calling him gruesome, because he's really honestly not.
King K. Rool is gruesome.
King K. Rool is gruesome. I'll call that dude gruesome any day of the week, but Donkey Kong deserves better. And when I say that the marketing was big on the graphics, there was a ton of marketing. Reportedly, the budget for the marketing of this game alone was around $3.76 million. Featuring things like downloadable video samples of gameplay, a trivia contest with over 800 participants, an hour-long online chat conference with 80 people attending it, featuring some of the developers. And there was even a deal made with Kellogg's to put Donkey Kong on their cereal boxes all the way up to April of 1995. And that is November, December, January, February, March, April. That is half a year of Donkey Kong on cereal boxes. So that's a while. There was also, most famously, a videotape sent to subscribers of the magazine Nintendo Power, titled Donkey Kong Country Exposed. This featured comedian Josh Wolf touring Nintendo of America's headquarters and talking to some of the playtesters of the game, as well as interviewing some of the developers. This tape is the part of the marketing that is generally considered to have been the most successful in pushing the game's sales. And boy, push them it did. Because Donkey Kong Country was crazy successful upon release. Game Rankings puts the game at an 89% when aggregating the reviews from the time, and Donkey Kong Country is considered by some to have saved the SNES from being eaten alive by the Sega CD and the Sony PlayStation, which were its new competitors at the time. And it was alleged for a long time that Shigeru Miyamoto actually didn't like the game, that he had referred to its gameplay as, quote, mediocre, but he has since dispelled these rumors and claimed that he actually has a fondness for Donkey Kong Country, and was even in contact with the devs of the game, the Stampers specifically, pretty much every day as the game was being made. So, like, he doesn't hate Donkey Kong Country. That rumor is false. By 2001, the game had reportedly sold a total of 9 million copies. Think about last week when we talked about Super Metroid having sold like a little over 1 million copies. Donkey Kong sold 9 million.
I'm glad the marketing paid off.
It really did, apparently. This number was further boosted by a port to the Game Boy Color in 2000 and a port to the Game Boy Advance in 2003, which on its own sold 960,000 copies, making it the 19th highest selling game for a Nintendo handheld in the US at the time. Donkey Kong Country has been re-released on both the Wii and Wii U Virtual Consoles, as well as the Virtual Console for the new 3DS, and it was also one of the games included on the SNES Classic. And 2 sequels for the SNES would come out of Rare, with Donkey Kong Country 2 Diddy's Kong Quest in 1995, and Donkey Kong Country 3 Dixie Kong's Double Trouble in 1996. And then the country name would just sort of disappear from Donkey Kong games for a real long time. They still came out. A lot of them kind of sucked after Rare left. In fact, basically all of them kind of sucked after Rare went away.
Jungle Beat.
Oh, boy. Is Jungle Beat good? I've never played it.
I haven't either.
I can't remember if people like that game or not. But the country name would return to the Donkey Kong franchise in 2010 when Retro Studios released Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Nintendo Wii, which is a very good game, but I think the 3DS version is better because the ground pound is on a button and not on a Wii Remote Shake.
Yeah, the roll also. I think the roll was the Wii Remote Shake. Yeah, something critical was on.
They both were.
Oh,
it was both because they were both the same input. It just depended on if you were moving or not.
Completely ridiculous. And then that got ported to 3DS, and that was better because it was actually a button press. So yeah, but it was still, very good game.
Yes, very, very good game. Diddy Kong would go on to star in his own game, Diddy Kong Racing, for the N64 in 1997. And would also end up being made a playable character in Smash as of Super Smash Bros. Brawl. He's been in every game since. And King K. Rool would follow and become a playable character in the most recent entry, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, in terms of the soundtrack, the main guy on the soundtrack is actually different, but I think I'll get into him in a bit, but I think it's safe to save him specifically for a future entry in the series. So we are going to talk about Eveline Fischer. She was born in 1969 in Christchurch, Hampshire, or Hampshire. I assume Hampshire. That's how we say it here. But that also, to me, says that that's wrong if that's how we say it here. Whatever. More so than soundtracks, I was not able to find anything on Eveline Fischer, hard as I tried. But I was able to find that more so than doing soundtracks for Rare, she actually provided a lot of character voices for the company during its heyday. She is the voice of Pipsy the Mouse in Diddy Kong Racing. She is Tootie Embrentilda in Banjo-Kazooie, as well as Humba Wumba in Banjo-Tooie. She is Vela in Jet Force Gemini, Tiny Kong in Donkey Kong 64, and those tracks were actually recycled as Dixie Kong's voice in the Game Boy Advance re-releases of Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3. She is Joanna Dark in Perfect Dark. She was the original voice of Crystal in Dinosaur Planet, which would later get reworked into Star Fox Adventures, and I believe she would be recasted. Somebody else would play Crystal in the final game. As well as she provides various side voices in Conquer Live and Reloaded, as well as in Cameo, Elements of Power. But she appears to have not really worked in video games since 2005. And she also got married around this time, so she now goes by the name Eveline Novakovic. So yeah, that's all the information I could really find on her. In terms of discography, she worked on the soundtracks of Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Country 3. She did not work on 2. And also the soundtrack of Donkey Kong Land 3, which is the sort of the pseudo sequel kind of port of Donkey Kong Country 3 on the Game Boy Color. It's weird. She also did the soundtrack to Ken Griffey Jr.'s Winning Run. And she performed vocals for 2 songs in the Microsoft era of Rare. One from Conquer Live and Reloaded called, and please forgive me for butchering this French pronunciation, Dis-moi donc que tu es à moi, which translates to, so tell me then that you are mine, as well as the song A Lament for Solon in Cameo, Elements of Power. And that's the extent of the information that I can find on Miss Eveline Fischer or Eveline Novakovic. Now, the main composer for Donkey Kong Country 1 was actually David Wise. But, like I said, I think it'd be more appropriate to save him for a later game in the series. Whether that be, I'm kind of stuck between whether we should do him for Donkey Kong Country 2 or the one I currently have planned for way later down the year is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, which he also did the music for.
My vote's for Tropical Freeze, because that soundtrack is amazing.
My vote is also currently for Tropical Freeze, but we'll see how we feel when we get there. It'll probably be Tropical Freeze. Let's be real here. So Wise actually started working on the game as a freelancer and assumed that his compositions would just be placeholders and eventually they'd be replaced by a Japanese composer's work. Because, as he put it, he knew how important the Donkey Kong license was to Nintendo, and he figured that they were going to want one of their people to do the music. But once Rare heard his work, he was offered a full position at the company, and obviously his music wasn't a placeholder because it's in the game. Wise's inspirations for the soundtrack include Koji Kondo's work on Mario and Zelda, the soundtrack for the game Plock, which is a hell of a pull, the synthy soundtracks of movies in the 1980s, and 90s rock and dance music. He also says he was looking to imitate the sound of the Korg Wave Station synthesizer. So, you're potentially wondering, how does this game sound? Well, let's get right into it with our 5 critical tracks, and there's literally no better song to start with than Island Swing. The song was composed by David Wise, and this song apparently originated as the 3, quote, jungle demo tunes that Rare asked for before giving Wise a full-time position. And then those 3 tunes were combined to form one of the most recognizable songs in video games. It's the drum beat, the dun 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 dun, and then the main melody, the dun 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 dun. This is just the quintessential Donkey Kong theme, and I think a lot of that is because of Smash, because Smash pulled this song and uses it for everything. That probably had a really big part in it, but like, you can start just like, and people will recognize it just out of nowhere. This is, I really do think, one of the most iconic songs to ever be in a video game.
Absolutely had to be here, without question. You're right. Da 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 da. Like that rhythm, yeah, just a flawless piece.
I still like the Donkey Kong 64 version better, but that's just me. For critical track number 2, I also like. These 5 were no-brainers for me.
Yeah.
And number 2 was also a no-brainer, being Simian Segway. This one was composed by Eveline Fischer. This is the map screen music, and honestly, it's just a nice, carefree, super catchy song that really never fails to make me think of Donkey Kong Country. It is probably among my favorite map songs from any game on the SNES that has map screens, if we're being honest. Just the dun, 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 dun. And this even has a connection from 2 weeks ago when you talked about Bayonetta, because Yamaguchi is the one that did the remix of this song in Smash, which is super good, by the way. And yeah, I love this song. It's super catchy. Always puts me in a good mood when I hear it. Just, great.
Kudos to Eveline Fischer for knocking this one out of the park. Nailed it. Another one that absolutely had to be here. And I'm happy to hear her work on this soundtrack. And this song, of all the songs, oh my gosh, a classic for Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah. And speaking of classic had to be here for Donkey Kong Country, I actually cannot make this list without our next track in the Critical 5. Number 3, Aquatic Ambiance. This one was composed by David Wise, and if I may quote our friend Matt, it is the song that ruined all water level songs from here on, because every song in any water level in any game now tries to be aquatic ambiance.
Yep.
And not many of them succeed.
This one is flawless. It takes a while to build, and it puts you in that environment, but once the melody goes, it's sublime.
This is, I think, I called Jungle Swing the quintessential Donkey Kong song. I think this is single-handedly the quintessential water level song. If I had to take a guess, I would say that this is probably the most remixed song on OC Remix. By a country mile. I'm pretty sure every remixer on the face of the planet has given this song a swing at least once. It is pretty much, at least it is the most remixed song from Donkey Kong Country by far, but I really would say it's probably in the top 3 most remixed songs on the entire website.
And just think, you have aquatic ambiance in this game. And then, as David Wise, you followed up in Donkey Kong Country 2 with Sticker Brush Symphony. Two amazing, just ethereal sounding pieces that don't rely tremendously on melody for most of the song, but they're such classics.
And just, it's really nice to listen to this song and just sort of zone out, I think. It's really good for that. And it also just sort of feels like water. But I also agree with Matt. This ruined all water level music after this. Because again, it all tried to be aquatic ambiance and it can't. It's a really high bar. It's too high a bar. Don't even try. Or maybe do try, but
And while we're talking about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, the take on aquatic ambiance in that game, also David Wise. Also, Current Capers, I think it's called. Also, perfect.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. But it is not my favorite song in the game. That goes to critical track number 4, Treetop Rock. This one was composed by Eveline Fischer, and it is my, again, personal favorite song in the game. And just the general groove to it, it has this sort of sinister feel to it almost. It sounds evil, but it's also just a song you want to snap along to. I really, really like this song a lot.
I think out of the critical 5 here that you've selected, this is the one I'm not as familiar with, but it's still great. I think it's a good pick.
It's one of those later game songs, I feel like, and a lot of people sort of overlook it because you've got your island swings, you've got your aquatic ambiances, you've got your simian segues, you have number 5 on the critical tracks list. So, like, a lot of people sort of go over it, I think. But I genuinely think that it is one of the best songs in the game. But, speaking of that number 5, and another one of the most iconic songs to come out of this game, it's Gang Plank Galleon. This one was composed by David Wise, and it is the final boss theme as you fight King K. Rool on the deck of his pirate ship. And this is generally one of the most iconic boss themes in the Donkey Kong franchise. It even has gone on to basically just become K. Rool's theme in general in later stuff like Smash. Smash itself has 2 remixes of this song. Both are fantastic. The ultimate version is especially good. And I love that it starts off real piratey, and then just turns into a rock song, and somehow just, it works. That doesn't feel like it should work, but it does work. The boss itself is really nothing to write home about. He's kind of boring, actually. But the song is definitely worth talking about.
Yeah, and it's always really cool when you have a soundtrack that's really just dominated, I think, just aurally by percussion. Like, percussion drives everything on this soundtrack, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And for future remixes to kind of mix up that balance a little bit, change the instrumentation. This is such a great song for a final boss, but we talked about last week with the Big Boss Confrontation 1, the Ridley battle theme from Super Metroid. Mm-hmm. And it's super interesting to hear how people can take, Super Nintendo sounds and then just interpret it differently for great effect in future remixes.
And this would have been the same year as Super Metroid, 94.
Yeah.
So, very interesting to hear. You're right, the 2, sort of opposing sounds. Also, it should be noted that this boss starts the rare tradition of fake-out credits. You beat him, and then the credits roll, but they're obviously the fake credits, and then he gets up, and it starts a second phase. So that's fun. They do that in Banjo-Kazooie. That's where it got the most famous. Both of the Banjo games feature fake out credits. But yeah, very good song. So, in terms of tracks on the cutting room floor, once again, we both have 2. Peter, hit me with yours.
I feel like I'm just going to fill out a couple songs that I feel like people would expect to be on our list because I don't have experience playing the game. But again, I'm familiar with the tunes, the themes, especially the ones that have endured over time. Of course, one of them being Theme. Theme, of course, being the opening theme, the theme that's the animation reference to earlier, where it's Cranky Kong sitting on like the red bit of his old Donkey Kong days, and like kind of old timey version playing, but yeah, dropping this new funky beat with tons of percussion again. So this version composed by David Wise, but it definitely borrows that original Donkey Kong theme by Yukio Kanaoka. But yeah, just it's a neat way of saying like, look, this is a new game, a totally new style with 2D platforming. We're here. We're bringing even a little bit of monkey noises. Just bringing it in there. It's a neat little way. I also especially think of Corruptions with Vine Sauce Vinny, and how this intro in particular, or even like the rare logo splash, can get just so twisted. So just fantastic stuff there.
Your description just makes me think of Donkey Kong like falling from the top and just shouting, "Get out of here, Grandpa! We're 3D models now!"
Yeah. Hey, we're in the 90s. We're cool.
You're out of touch, old man.
Punt. My other track on the cutting room floor for me is Bonus Room Blitz. So, I mean, it's the bonus room where you get to collect lots of bananas. And also composed by David Wise. Shout out to Video Game Donkey. Use this one a lot at the end of his videos. So it's just a classic theme, especially if you're hearing banana collecting sounds during it. I think it just had to be here for me.
This is one that kind of hurt to leave off. But, like, that's the nature of the show. Sometimes you gotta make hard decisions. I do think this was close to being in the critical 5. It just didn't work out. I had other songs. I like Treetop Rock's the only one that I possibly could have traded out for any other song. But that's my favorite song in the game, so I wanted to put it on the list.
Yeah.
For me, my first cutting room floor track is Funky's Fugue. Song was composed by Robin Beanland and arranged by David Wise, and I just think it's super interesting because this was originally written for Killer Instinct.
Oh, really?
And you can even hear it in a commercial for Killer Instinct. This was pointed out to us by our friend Luke after we did our Smasterpieces episode. He tweeted at me and Matt with the video of the commercial, and you could clearly hear it in that commercial, but it was adopted for use in Donkey Kong Country instead. But yeah, it was originally written for Killer Instinct.
I guess in a way, the "oh yeah" doesn't make too much sense for Funky Kong.
I love this song though. I think it's super good.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
But yeah, you tell me this was originally written for a fighting game, that checks out 100%. And my other song on the cutting room floor is Fear Factory. Also composed by David Wise. This is so different from everything else we've talked about on this soundtrack. It's just really rad and feels incredibly tense, and it's perfect for the factory levels that it plays in. Especially, I think I associate this song very heavily with Darkness, because the level I can think of most clearly is a song where the lights are turning on and off, which I'm not a huge fan of that level overall, because I think one of the worst gimmicks you can do is darkness in a 2D platformer. I hate that gimmick in every game it's ever shown up in. But yeah, this song is just really, really good, really tense. I have a great time with it. It also was very close to being on the Critical 5.
Yeah, especially when you're throwing bottomless pits in there.
Mm-hmm.
No good with darkness there. But yeah, great pick for sure.
So what will I never forget about Donkey Kong Country? I already said earlier, like, watching my uncle play this and its sequels, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why I am sitting in this chair right now recording this podcast. It was the step one in the many, many steps it took for original Soundchat to happen. Without these games, I would be a much, much different person, I feel like. So that's what I think I'll never forget overall.
That's pretty neat. I didn't know that this was such a formative game for you, but good to learn that.
So, for our transition, we like to highlight a fan cover, a fan remix. I knew exactly what song I was going to use, and I've known since we decided that this was going to be part of the show, and I was just sort of saving it for when we finally did Donkey Kong Country. It is from the remix album Harmony of Heroes, which was a remix album that was made to celebrate Super Smash Bros. Brawl and its various remixes. I've used a song from it before, back in the Luigi's Mansion episode on Halloween last year. But this one is by Sebastian Martinson. It is featuring Christopher Wu. It is a remix of Gangplank Galleon called A K-Rool Pub Crawl. I absolutely love this remix. It is probably one of my favorite remixes of all time. Please enjoy, and we will be right back.
So we move from a game that was important to your formative years as a child to literally one of my top 5 favorite games of all time. I'd like to talk about Mass Effect 2. We've talked about the original Mass Effect in episode 4 of the show, very early on.
Was that really all the way back in episode 4?
We talked about it along with Rakuen, yeah.
That feels like it was so much more recent. Time has flown.
Yeah, we're zooming along here. So I don't feel like I need to talk about like what Mass Effect generally is, but yeah, its sequel is really up there for me among my favorites. Mass Effect 2 was released on January 26th, 2010. On Xbox 360 and PC in North America. Australia and Europe got the game on the 28th and 29th of January 2010, respectively. A PS3 version was released in North America on January 18th, 2011, so almost a year later. Then there was Mass Effect Trilogy that was released for Xbox 360, PS3, and PC 8 months after the trilogy's completion on November 6th, 2012. Somehow, the Mass Effect trilogy has not had any current-gen remasters. Mass Effect trilogy has somehow not been released on PS4 and Xbox One is completely beyond me. And it's frustrating because, like, the PC versions of the game, like, don't have any controller support, or at least officially, last I checked. At least there's backwards compatibility. If you have the Xbox 360 games, you can play them on Xbox One, but it's literally playing the 360 games. It's like no 1080p 60 graphics or 4K or whatever. I feel like missed opportunity if that just hasn't happened. If they're saving it for next gen, like, yeah, I would love that, but Mass Effect Trilogy is one of those ones that's like, how has that not happened this generation?
I agree that it's really kind of weird that it hasn't happened, but also then I look at the current state of BioWare and I realize, oh, right.
You don't even need BioWare, though. That's the thing. There are so many companies out there that are just about porting.
That's true.
Like Panic Button. For Doom to port it to other things. Like, I don't know. It's super interesting that one of these iconic trilogies in all of gaming hasn't made the move forward, especially when we're coming up on a new generation that's going to be all about backwards compatibility with PS4, Xbox One, all that. Just, that's unusual. So as you reference, Mass Effect 2, developed by BioWare, published by Electronic Arts. What is Mass Effect 2? It is an action role-playing game, but the combat involved is based heavily in third-person shooter mechanics. So it's essentially really like a third-person shooter with some splashes of action RPG elements. There is a character class customization involved that you can set up your main playable character, not only what he or she looks like and their background, but giving them a certain class allows what special powers or weapons that the player can use. Also, Mass Effect is famous for dialogue wheels, this sort of circular wheel of options of how you can respond to different dialogue choices. And it's the whole idea of the Paragon versus the Renegade that we also referenced in the first Mass Effect episode. Not really, it's not fair to say like good or bad or like good versus evil. Paragon being more of like a virtuous charmer.
Boy Scout.
Yeah, like a Boy Scout. Whereas like the Renegade is being like the intimidating badass, essentially.
Paragon is Captain America. Renegade is, let's say, Cable?
Sure. Something like that, yeah.
Cable or maybe Deadpool, but less funny.
Yeah, so like there are generally those two choices, or you can kind of just go middle of the road, but the game rewards you for, it's a big thing in like the 2010 era of games where it's like this morality choice thing, and you kind of want to lean heavily into one or the other to open up more options, essentially. So the plot of Mass Effect 2, it's kind of dependent in a way, like players can start either like a new game with a new version of the main character, or the big thing about the Mass Effect trilogy, you can import your save from the previous game with all of the choices that your Commander Shepard had made in the previous game and bring those all forward into the new game. But in Mass Effect 2, the year is 2183, and it's shortly after the events of the first game, where the SSV Normandy, the ship where everyone is on, the Normandy is attacked by a group of ruthless aliens called the Collectors. And while he or she is in the process of saving their crew, Commander Shepard dies at the start of the game. But their body is recovered by the radical Humanity First group called Cerberus. And Cerberus in the original Mass Effect were painted as these, not necessarily villains, but just like not this good group of people. Like they take these drastic efforts to push humanity's efforts first throughout the galaxy amongst all these alien races. So after Cerberus's Project Lazarus is a success, Shepard is brought back to life, and they're informed that these collectors are attacking human colonies throughout the galaxy. Just humanity is disappearing at these different colonies. Now, at the request of Cerberus's director, the Elusive Man, Shepard must pull together a new crew to find out what the collectors want and stop them if necessary. So, can Shepard and their new crew defeat the collectors? How will Shepard's old crew members react to them being alive and working for this group, Cerberus? And what does this have to do with the still at-large Reaper threat from the first game? Joe, here's what I'll ask you. What are your experiences with Mass Effect 2?
As with Mass Effect 1, I have played it, but it was several years ago, probably like 2013, 2014. I played it on the Trilogy Collection, which I still own on PS3. And I enjoyed it a great deal. Played straight Paragon because I am a social anxiety extends into video games and I can't be mean. It makes me anxious. That's a real thing. Like those tweets you'll see where it's like the media says that video games will make you a violent killer, but here I am in games with moral choices, afraid to make the evil choice because I'm afraid the characters won't like me.
Yep.
I'm that, but put into a human. And I don't remember a huge amount because my memory is a void for which information is thrown and disappears. But I do remember enough to remember that I did like the game. I remember most of the characters. I do remember some stuff I imagine we might bring up later on in the episode that I think I can recall fairly well. And it's a good game. I'm not the biggest fan of shooters, but I don't remember having a bad time with Mass Effect, any of them. So that's, I think, a good sign in general for the series.
Yeah, fortunately, depending on what you pick, you can use powers a lot. You don't necessarily have to use guns, but depending on what class you pick, yeah, I mean, it can become very shooter heavy.
I went straight soldier.
There you go. Tons of guns. Yeah, all guns. All guns open to you. That makes sense. So yeah, like I said at the top, like this is top 5 favorite games all time for me. Love this game. It's just the story. It's interesting. You mentioned like, you remember too much from it. Well, the main storyline, there isn't that much to it. Like there's only, several key missions, but it's really all about deepening your bond with the characters that are on your crew and, earning that loyalty with missions and really fleshing out these crew members and their characters to make you care about them. Some more successfully than others, but
Ashley,
I think that's where, that's where the meat of this game really is. And that was the goal of development early on. Like, developing this game was, according to the team, about creating something that was, quote, less about being a game and more about being an experience. So it is all about, developing those characters. What you may see as side missions become actually super critical. And that's where, really your time is spent mostly with this game. Now, the first Mass Effect game was published by Microsoft Studios. And that's kind of why it started early on as an Xbox exclusive. But after Electronic Arts, EA, acquired BioWare in October 2007, which was just like a month before the first Mass Effect launch, EA relied on the Unreal Engine, specifically Unreal Engine 3, to really drive the future of Mass Effect. And this is where you see a lot of, sort of influence from Unreal Engine, but also like the Gears of War cover shooting mechanics, like, the chest-high walls they have to get behind for cover. You see that a lot in Mass Effect 2 and its sequel. Whereas Mass Effect 1 is a very haphazard combat system that is not reliant on cover, like, hardly at all.
Mass Effect 1 had a lot more, had other differences as well. Like, and I understand why it was taken out, for anybody that does not know, Mass Effect 2 changes one very major thing for me, which is guns now have limited ammo. Mm-hmm. Which they didn't in Mass Effect 1, which, from what I am told, meant that if you knew what you were doing, you could make an unstoppable, overheating gun that could never stop firing forever, and you'd basically be able to kill God. And, alright, that makes sense why you would cut that. But I like having unlimited ammo more, personally. That was like my one change where I was like, They took away the one thing that was for me.
But at the same time, ammo drops were all over the place. And also, you have regenerating health in Mass Effect 2 here. So, like, that was also a nice change that they implemented. But still, there's so much more of a focus on shooter gameplay in Mass Effect 2 compared to Mass Effect 1. And for better or for worse, some people may like the heavier emphasis on role-playing and, like, RPG nitty-gritty data in ME1. But some people may like the more streamlined action of 2, and that's kind of where I fall personally. But this was BioWare's first game with shooting mechanics like this. And so a heavy emphasis was placed on getting it right early in development, then mixing in the RPG elements in later. The game is very big, especially when it's like on a sound front. There are like 60 levels, 150 cinematics, 20,000 conversation animations, that they didn't, sort of farm out with a randomized automated algorithm process. Looking at you, Andromeda. 90 voice actors, apparently, who played 546 characters.
Jeez.
About 32,000 lines of voiceover in what is approximately 40 hours of gameplay. And of those actors, it's an incredible cast. Certainly, Mark Meer and Jennifer Hale playing male and female Commander Shepard. Tremendous performances. But then you get actors like Yvonne Strahovski, Brandon Keener, Courtney Taylor, Steve Bloom, DC Douglas, Seth Green, Martin Sheen, Trisha Helfer, Carrie Ann Moss, Claudia Black, Keith David, Jim Cummings, Gray Delisle, Dave Fennoy, Quentin Flynn, Ali Hillis, Yuri Lowenthal. That's just like a small sampling of the actors. And then I learned that Maggie Baird is in this game, and she plays the Justicar Samara. Now, who is Maggie Baird? Maggie Baird is the mother of Billie Eilish, current pop star phenom.
That's so weird.
It is very weird, but it just shows that it's quite the cast in this game. And, we're talking about, Paragon and Renegade too. According to cinematic designer John Ebinger, about 92% of Mass Effect players were Paragons. Like, that's a lot. And yeah, so much for like the escapist fantasy of video games about acting violently and being non-societal conforming. Like, it's just as you said, like, I don't want to be the asshole.
The social anxiety extends into the fictional universe. That's a real thing. There have to be studies on this. Mm-hmm. If there aren't, there should be.
100%. Oddly enough, though, for all of the stories we've heard about on the show where game development is just like this awful project that, delays and getting pushed back and things like that, I'm sure it was a difficult, development schedule for Mass Effect 2, but it's cited as being a rare example of a game that it's on time, on budget, and it exceeded quality goals. So that's kind of amazing. Go figure. Mass Effect 2 was revealed at GDC 2009 with a teaser trailer that stated that Shepard had been killed in action. Meanwhile, a few months later at E3 2009, it was revealed that Shepard would be playable, but could die by the end of the game, which is absolutely true. The game was reviewed exceptionally well, has a Metacritic score of 96 on Xbox 360 and 94 on the PS3 and PC versions. Certainly praise was given to the game's diverse characters, interactive storytelling, voice acting, and art design. There are criticisms of the RPG elements being slimmed down in favor of combat, as well as very slow planet scanning for elements, which is definitely a thing. But it's occasionally referred to as the Empire Strikes Back of video games. I'm sure not only for its like science fiction sort of storytelling, but also because of how much the sequel improved in every way over the original. The game was heavily awarded. It won Game of the Year from the DICE Awards, the BAFTAs, Eurogamer, Game Trailers, IGN, among others. I think the biggest competition that year for 2010 for that award would be Red Dead Redemption. So you win some, you lose some. But it also received nominations for its score at the BAFTAs and the Spike Video Game Awards. At the BAFTAs, it lost to Heavy Rain, and at the VGAs, Red Dead Redemption. So, a very good score as well. Mass Effect, the series overall, topped 7 million units sold before the release of the third game, apparently, and it had 14 million units sold for the franchise as of July 5th, 2014. The legacy of Mass Effect 2, this was a game at the time where DLC was very heavy, so there were 4 main DLC packs. There was Kasumi Stolen Memory, Overlord, Lair of the Shadow Broker, and Arrival. If you had to get one, you gotta go Lair of the Shadow Broker. Like, that was the best one by far, without question. The other ones were good. Like, they added, Kasumi and Zaid as, party members. But, Shadow Broker was fantastic. Then you had its sequel, Mass Effect 3, which released on March 6th, 2012. That concluded the trilogy, for better or for worse, with controversy and all that about the ending. And then Mass Effect Andromeda released on March 21st, 2017. There was a lot that went wrong with that game.
Boy, was there!
As far as the overall impression and the taste that the Mass Effect series left in people's mouths. Again, I feel like having no remaster for the original trilogy is a crime. But, now that director Casey Hudson is back at the helm at BioWare, they're apparently thinking about the future of Mass Effect, which may not be an especially bright one, considering BioWare may be retooling Anthem, and then there's still Dragon Age to develop. So it may be a little while until we see anything from Mass Effect.
It is also a miracle that BioWare is still around after how bad Anthem has gone. So that's going to add time, I feel like.
Considering EA's history, I agree with you.
I thought they were done.
Yeah, for real. There are multiple composers on the Mass Effect 2 soundtrack, but the one I wanted to talk about today is Sam Hulick. Sam Hulick, born on September 24th, 1974 in Gary, Indiana. Today he is based out of the Chicago area. And he grew up in a music-filled household and was very interested in technology, and he started writing music at age 16 on an Amiga computer. He graduated from Indiana University as a computer programmer, and he spent several years as a web developer, honestly, to pay the bills and to kind of build up a fund so that he could do what he really wanted to do, was compose music. He entered a contest at the Game Audio Network Guild. We've talked about Gang before. And he won this award for young composers in 2003. That kind of helped propel his career. And in 2003, he also scored his first title, Maximo versus Army of Zin. I can't say I've heard that one before, but that's
not familiar.
That's certainly a title. According to his biography on his website, quote, Hulick's original scores range from fantasy landscapes and sweeping sci-fi to orchestral bombast, intimate piano, and small string ensembles. And yeah, I feel like that kind of hits the gamut pretty well based on what he has worked on. He says he'd love to compose for the Elder Scrolls someday, or just really any epic fantasy, especially like a fantasy RPG. And the avocado is his favorite fruit.
Gross.
I feel like it's important to mention, though, that when we look back on our Mass Effect episode of Original Soundchat, 4 of our critical 5 tracks were at least co-composed by Sam Hulick. So he's around for the entire Mass Effect trilogy, contributing songs here and there. Never necessarily the lead, but always an important player in this trilogy. He also scored new story elements for the Baldur's Gate Enhanced Editions, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. Also worked on Red Orchestra 2. Heroes of Stalingrad, also scored A Way Out.
Hey, it's a good game.
It's a pretty good game. And he also scored a documentary called Jens Jensen, The Living Green. So, development research for the soundtrack of Mass Effect 2 in particular. Other composers include the main composer, Jack Wall, who we covered in that Mass Effect episode, but also David Cates, Jimmy Hinson, known in the OC Remix community as Big Giant Circles, and Brian DiDomenico. These other composers were generally brought in pretty late into the project for the first Mass Effect, but they were assembled from the beginning for Mass Effect 2. In particular, Sam Hulick, I don't actually have him on any critical tracks here, but I do need to point out that like one of his most famous pieces that he wrote for the Mass Effect trilogy was the Uncharted Worlds theme, the map theme from the first Mass Effect. So that's brought back into Mass Effect 2 with the song New Worlds, kind of touched up a little bit by Jack Wall, but still like his foundation. Also the song The Normandy Attacked is also co-composed with Jack Wall and Sam Hulick. But each of the characters, the team members as part of Shepard's team, each of them have their own theme that's kind of tied into their story missions. And Sam Hulick wrote the themes for Jacob, Jack, and Legion. Mass Effect 1 kind of had this more electronic music first score, but Mass Effect 2 is a darker and grittier tone of a game, so there was a shift more to rely on traditional cinematic orchestra for this one, but also still obviously blending in that electronic influence. The audio team had it rough, though, because the transition from the first Mass Effect to Mass Effect 2, they apparently had to change like their entire audio system from apparently this ISACT system over to Audio Kinetics WWise. And so, therefore, according to the audio team, all of their assets, tech, tools, and systems had to be re-implemented for this new game. Now, after this foundation was established, the audio team was only really brought on for the last 8 months of production. So when you think about all the voiceover, all the sound effects, all the Foley for those sound effects, all that work done in 8 months, kind of amazing to still think that it was still on budget, on time, all of that. For the soundtrack, there were over 750 composed assets, whether it was stems, stings, all sorts of things like that. And Jack Wall wrote about 65 minutes solo by himself, and then there was about more than 100 minutes from all the other composers overall. They specifically noted the use of Dropbox, the website, to keep everything really centrally located and updated.
Yeah, Dropbox, saving the day again.
I mean, Google Drive nowadays, but Dropbox at the time.
I've been learning lately at school, been learning the wonders of Source Tree hooked up to a GitHub, but that's more for code and stuff, so.
Aha, very, very true. You may be familiar with the Mass Effect soundtrack, so it's not entirely different when you think about Mass Effect 2, but yeah, think orchestra and electronic music, and I think that's best represented when we get into the critical 5 tracks here. The first critical track being The Elusive Man. The Elusive Man, composed by Jack Wall. I feel like for it being a song you hear very early in the game, when it's playing during conversations with the character, the Elusive Man, it establishes really early on this syncopated rhythm that is iconic to this game, this so like it's a kind of a big sort of motif that carries on throughout the game. And like there are the synths present, what almost sounds like guitar strings in a way, and then these deep strings come in. And all to support this character of the elusive man. What a character. Not an antagonist per se.
But as close as you can get without crossing that line.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, he's not the collector threat, but he's not entirely on your side either. And it's amazing when you get an actor like Martin Sheen to portray this character. So good.
Mm-hmm. He's a very interesting character. I think he's probably one of the most interesting things about Mass Effect 2 and 3. They just strike this perfect balance of like, I don't trust you as far as I can throw you, but I guess we're working together.
I disagree with your methods, but you do have humanity's best interests at heart.
Yeah, and so I think this theme, it's the guitar string parts that you're talking about, I think fully like bring that tone with them. I don't know how else to describe it, but yeah, I think this is the perfect theme for this character, and it's a very good piece.
Absolutely. Number 2 on the Critical 5. This is The Attack. This one is also composed by Jack Wall. This plays in the opening cutscene where the collectors destroy the Normandy, send Shepard out into space to his death. It's a fierce, ominous piece that really connects a tone for the music to this collector threat and immediately establishes them as a force to be reckoned with. It's not present in the clip. I do recommend listening to the whole piece if you get the chance. But the piece ends with this somber solo piano. And that's like when Shepard is losing air and then it goes out, to the title splash. Really powerful moment. Really great piece overall.
And I definitely agree. I think the ending is my favorite part, with the piano part and all that. 'Cause I did not know that this happened when I played Mass Effect 2.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a full surprise to me, somehow, despite the fact that A, the game had been out for years, and B, I'm friends with you and Matt and our friend John. All of you are huge fans of Mass Effect. And I had just never heard about it at any point in any way, so it was a huge shock. This whole sequence, so.
Which is kind of weird because I could have sworn for the Game of the Year show that I put on at the time, if I could have sworn I wrote this, where it was like, to summarize the game, like the premise of the story is like starts, Commander Shepard is dead.
Oh, probably. I might have just. So I have a bad habit of, and it used to be way worse, where like in shows like that, if it was a game that I was not familiar with, I just sort of zoned out.
There you go. That would make sense why it didn't stick.
Maybe. But yeah, I genuinely I had no idea that that's how the game was going to open. So I think just by virtue of being attached to that moment, this song should be here in general.
Number 3 on the Critical 5. The Normandy was destroyed, but now, the Normandy reborn. This is composed by Jimmy Henson and Jack Wall. And with Cerberus's assets at their side, they are able to create a new Normandy, the Normandy SR2. It's the return of the Normandy. It's like seeing an old friend. It's like they made the Normandy a character for how much you explored it in the first game, for how much you'll continue to explore it in the second game. And so it feels good to see, hello, old friend. You've been touched up a little bit, but that's still the Normandy. And I feel like this is this game's example of the track in Mass Effect 1, The Citadel, where it's like these triumphant, positive sounding themes, these big swells that try to really hit you with the emotion of the moment and the gravitas of what you are experiencing. I feel like this is the similar kind of comparison moment. It's always been a track that's just stuck out to me.
I think the description of like seeing an old friend is apt, honestly. Because it does have that triumphant feeling to it of like, oh yeah, it also just, not just like seeing an old friend, but also like, we're back, baby. It's time to go. Mm-hmm. We got work to do.
That's exactly what it is. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just generally a feeling of, it's time to get to work. Let's start.
So that is important to have on this list, I think, just so it's not all deep and negative and whatnot, or just tense. But I do have to point out a character theme for the Critical 5 here. So many could have gone here, honestly. But for me, the one that stands out, number 4 on the Critical 5 here, this is Miranda. Miranda Lawson, played by Aussie actress Yvonne Strahovski, famous for her work on the TV show Chuck. This track is composed by David Cates. And so, like I mentioned, each character has their own themes that primarily go with their personalized missions, whether it's the loyalty mission or ones that are really important to those characters. But I feel like this melody is just memorable in general, even outside Miranda's missions. And also, Miranda's just the best, in my opinion. But just overall, an excellent fusion of these synths and orchestra and ba-ba-bam, ba-ba-bam. It's just like, it's really like in your face, like Miranda can kick some butt. Let's just say that.
I don't like Miranda.
Oh no.
I don't remember why, but I have vague memories of, I don't like Miranda as a character, but I could not give you a reason why. Like, I've had this sort of itch to replay the trilogy for a couple of years now. And this is another reason why I should probably do that. But yeah, I think this song is very good. I think I have one character theme that I like way more, which we'll get to when we get to Cutting Room Floor. But yeah, I just generally not a fan of the character Miranda. I think the only character I dislike more than Miranda is Ashley.
You mean spacist? Space racist?
I don't know. It's the two human women that I can think of in this game are the worst. And I don't remember why. Well, Ashley, I can remember why, because she's boring. She's so boring. And if I replay, Caden is going to be the one that stays alive.
But Caden's not great either.
Caden's also not great, and I regretted saying that the instant. I think I like Ashley a little bit more than I like Caden. But like it's the aliens that are all the more interesting characters. I feel like, well, the aliens and Joker. I like Joker. Joker's fun.
Yeah. So, Liara's canon best girl. Who is your best girl?
I like Tally a lot.
Yeah.
And I know that's a basic answer. That's like the most basic answer you can possibly come up with. But I like Tally a whole lot.
Yeah, she's great. There's no judgment or question there. I totally get it. So, number 5 on the critical track, the song that is iconic to this game, the song that has to be here. You know, it has to be Suicide Mission. Please listen to the full version of this song. It is composed by Jack Wall, and it is a legendary video game piece. Like, honestly, a 30-second clip cannot possibly do it justice. This plays during the last level of the game. The best level in the entire trilogy. The one where there's the most at stake. There's the most variables at play with how your game can end, who lives, who dies. So many factors there. Just chills listening to this piece and remembering this part of the game. Suicide Mission is the one that is clear. And again, it's that same that same motif, because apparently this was one of the first pieces that was written for the game, according to director Casey Hudson's request. So this is just a phenomenal piece of music. Had to be here.
So I guess this is the part where we ask, so who did you lose during the Suicide Mission? Because somehow I remember who I lost.
The first time I played, I only lost Thane.
I believe that I lost... Well, I know for a fact I lost Legion. But I think I also lost Grunt? I'm pretty sure he died as well, but I don't 100% remember on that one. I know for a fact Legion died. Because that tied into a character in 3 that I remember. I remember mentioning that to Matt, and Matt going, You know, you could just go reload the game and go do the things that will stop them from dying, you know? And I was like, no, I'm good. Everything's fine. I like Legion, but I didn't like Legion enough to go reload my save.
Right. And also, like, for your first time around, like, it's your true playthrough, you know?
Mm-hmm.
The decisions that you make genuinely, honestly, without knowing all of the inner workings that are involved in that mission. But just epic, going through the Omega 4 relay, making sure you're fully prepared. And yeah, if you're not, even Shepard can die. So I mean, it's just a great level overall. Tracks on the cutting room floor. Joe, you have 2. Hit me with them.
So I was not super familiar with this soundtrack before going and listening to it before this episode. But 2 songs really stuck out to me. One being Freedom's Progress. One composed by Jack Wall. Parts of this song have an almost Metal Gear feeling to them for me.
Yeah.
Like, it just sounds like something I'd hear in Metal Gear Solid 4 or something like that. I found that's literally the only reason I put it on the list. I'm not gonna lie. I don't know where this plays. You might?
There's a Freedom's Progress level. It's one of the early humanity colonies, like very early on.
I see. Okay. But the one I do know where it plays, and I mentioned earlier that I had a character theme that I would put instead of Miranda, and that would be Samara. Composed by Jimmy Henson. I don't remember a lot about Samara outside of the fact that she is an Asari Justicar, which I had to look up the word Justicar to remember it. So that should show you how much I remember about this character. But her theme is so good. Like those vocals, the sort of Indian flair to it. It's just, it kind of blew me away when I listened to it. Honestly.
And just think it's tied into Billie Eilish's mom.
Yeah, that makes it even weirder, actually, but it's still a great song.
It definitely is. I have a couple deep cuts on mine. The first of these being Callista. This song is composed by Saki Kaskas, who is also known for composing like Need for Speed music on several of those games. So bringing this song in from the outside because they needed music to play in clubs like Club Afterlife. So you want to talk to Arya. You want to go talk to Carrie Ann Moss and only think of Trinity while this Asari named Arya Talok is talking at you. But yeah, just a really chill electronic vibe. It's pretty different than most of the Mass Effect soundtrack, but it has that perfect like walking into a club vibe and hearing this playing. And it's like a distinct memory from this game.
The beginning almost reminds me of Jet Set Radio. When the rest of the song goes in, like that feeling disappears, but the beginning is very Jet Set in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I can hear that for sure. The other one is called Infiltration. So this one's composed by Jack Wall, and there were 2 other albums released in addition to the original soundtrack for Mass Effect 2. They were shorter albums, but they were themed. One was an atmospheric album, and the other was a combat album. And so this song comes from the combat album, and I think it's just an incredibly memorable combat piece that like just really gets you excited and pumped up to be like in the heat of the moment in battle. And I feel like this may be one where if you've played the game before, if you have fond memories of the game, you may hear this one and be like, oh, that's what this song is. Like, it's a pretty notable riff and melody if you have enough combat experience in Mass Effect 2. What will I never forget about Mass Effect 2? Pretty much everything. Like I said, it's so high up there on my favorite games of all time. The characters, the music, the overall adventure. It's a game I think back on and like, if I wanted to spend, the hours to play a game that I beat in my past, I don't think I would ever tire of playing it. It's so fantastic. And I just think it's one of those examples of like the best game that could have been made at that time. Granted, some things I'm sure age a little bit. In the 10 years since Mass Effect 2, holy crap, we're getting old. But at the time, like that and Red Dead in the same year, that was the pinnacle. Holy cow.
So for me, I've already proven that I will forget a lot because that's not something reflected on the game. That's me. I'm bad at remembering things. I need to replay the trilogy, especially now that I have the actual ending in Mass Effect 3. I didn't when I played it. I had the original ending.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember like bits and pieces, characters and stuff like that. And I remember it being very good at making sure that you had a connection to the characters. Even the ones you didn't like, you had some connection to. And I think Mass Effect 2 is when that really started. I think gameplay-wise, I like 1 better.
Okay.
But I'm pretty like sure that when people say that 2 is overall a better game as a package, I think they're correct. I think that is fair. And also now you realize this means that you have set yourself up with a contract that near the beginning of next year, you have to do Mass Effect 3.
Yes.
Because now you did 1 year 1, and now you've done 2 year 2. You gotta do Mass Effect 3 next year.
I am entirely aware of that, and I'm pretty sure that was the plan.
Ah, well, there you go.
But maybe it will be paired with a game that is a little more connected in terms of theme.
That is twice we have done a Mass Effect game with a game that cannot in any sane way be connected to it. How would we connect? We didn't do themes back then, I don't think.
No, we didn't.
But how would we have connected Rakuen and Mass Effect 1?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Mass Effect 1 doesn't have cancer.
I genuinely don't know. So you say that maybe we'll match it up with a game that could be paired up and themed with it easier, but tradition dictates that I bring like, I don't know. I genuinely can't think of one.
Well, I don't know. It might have to be a little more connected than saying, oh yeah, there are zingers and seeker swarms, and they are both bugs that have stingers that are enemies in these games.
The theme this week is bees.
Not the bees! Nailed it. That will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Joe is over at Thidobaga. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com. But it's that MP3 podcast version you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur over at anondino.squarespace.com, where Joe's other podcast, Smash Your Pieces, is also hosted. So check that out. But for these MP3 podcasts, find them on podcast storefronts around the globe, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, wherever you get your podcasts. You can take them with you on a run, in your car, at work, and we won't tell your bosses that you're listening to conversations about great video game music. Also, the show is on Spotify as a podcast feed, but also we have a Spotify playlist where if a song we talk about on the show is on Spotify, it's getting added to the playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Unsurprisingly, not Donkey Kong.
No.
But Mass Effect 2, I believe at least most of it. I'm hesitant to say that the last song on Your Cutting Room Floor is on Spotify, but the rest of it I know for a fact is.
Way to go, EA.
That'll be added. I believe all 4 Mass Effect games are on Spotify, even Andromeda.
Wow. Very, very interesting. So we'll also keep working on some bonus tracks here. Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Oh, we're talking about Christopher Larkin.
All right, we'll be talking about Gareth Coker. Okay, definite themes there next week.
Yes, that's easy. Easy theme.
No problems there. So to play us out, I got to talk about Suicide Mission. Like, someone's got to do something on Suicide Mission. It's the iconic song from this game. So over on YouTube, Ro Panuganti and Lord Biff created a prog metal version of Suicide Mission, and I really like how it sounded. Hopefully you do too. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.